Across continents, ruins whisper the same impossible story. Pyramids aligned to Orion's belt, stone circles tracking celestial cycles spanning millennia, underground chambers carved with star maps. Every civilization described luminous teachers descending from above, serpents of light, radiant figures who taught agriculture, architecture, astronomy before vanishing skyward. No contact existed between these cultures, yet their monuments speak identical languages. Shadows descending temple stairs at equinox, pillars framing stellar alignments, calendars measuring ages. Were ancient peoples simply watching the same sky? Or did something from those heavens once walk among them, leaving knowledge carved in stone meant to outlast memory? Morning light crept over the edge of a high plateau, revealing the ruins of a forgotten sanctuary built from weathered stone. At first glance, it looked like any abandoned site. Blocks scattered, walls broken, staircases worn down by centuries of wind. But when the sun rose a little higher, the ruins answered with something unexpected. Shadows shifted in a pattern too precise to be accidental, sliding across the steps in a steady rhythm until they aligned in a single straight line pointing toward the horizon. Whatever this place once was, its builders clearly cared about the sky. This plateau sat far from any ancient settlement. There were no living quarters, no marketplaces, no signs of daily life. Everything here served one purpose: to observe. Stone paths radiated outward from a central platform like spokes of a wheel, each angled toward a celestial event. One path marked the sunrise of the solstice. Another pointed to the place where a specific constellation rose in late summer. A third aligned to the setting of a star, once used by navigators across continents. The more researchers studied it, the more the site resembled a vast calendar, one carved into the earth long before modern astronomy. The central platform carried the clearest message. Its blocks were fitted with a precision that seemed out of place for a small, isolated sanctuary. At sunrise during equinox periods, a beam of light stretched across the main staircase and broke into 7 distinct segments. Each segment fit perfectly onto a carved panel on the lower steps. The panels were shaped into repeating serpentine patterns, as if the morning sun were intentionally tracing the body of a descending figure. To the builders, this descent was more than a symbol. It was a moment of revelation, tied to a larger cycle no longer remembered. Not far from the platform, a polished slab of darker stone lay fixed into the ground. Its surface formed a shallow angle and reflected the light upward, illuminating carvings etched deep into a nearby wall. These carvings did not depict scenes of worship or rulers. They resembled star charts, clusters, arcs, and lines arranged with mathematical consistency. Some corresponded to known constellations. Others formed patterns with no direct match in the sky above the plateau. Yet the builders treated them as equally important, giving each cluster a border and a distinct orientation. Whatever knowledge they recorded here, it connected the visible sky with something beyond it. Scholars found evidence that the sanctuary operated through a combination of light, shadow, and geometry. At dawn and dusk, its lines came alive. Stones that seemed randomly arranged revealed a larger intention, as the sun cast long diagonal shadows across their faces. When overhead light struck the carvings, the refractions created faint, luminous shapes on the ground: circles, half-arcs, and spirals. These were not decorative. Each spiral aligned with a different track across the heavens, mimicking the curved motion of celestial bodies over long periods. A patient observer could have mapped an entire cycle of the stars, simply by watching the shifting light within the sanctuary. No one lived here permanently. The lack of shelters suggested that this plateau served as a destination, not a residence. People came here to watch the sky, to measure, to learn, and then they left. Tools discovered in the area hinted at travelers arriving from regions far beyond the valley. Pottery fragments, pigments, and shards of stonework connected the site to multiple cultures separated by large distances. The plateau acted as a meeting ground, a neutral territory where different groups might gather to share observations or perform rituals tied to the heavens. The deeper researchers explored the plateau's features, the more it resembled a larger pattern found across ancient civilizations. In distant jungles, temples created illusions of serpents gliding down their staircases during equinoxes. In mountain regions, isolated sanctuaries served as observatories for tracking the movement of stars that appeared only seasonally. Along coastal cliffs, stone towers aimed at the horizon, aligned with specific planetary risings. And in far-off deserts, monuments were oriented with an accuracy that required centuries of accumulated sky-watching. Each region had its own myths and customs, but the architecture always mirrored a universal fascination with the heavens. The plateau underscored this shared obsession. Its builders weren't crafting symbols for daily worship. They were documenting cycles. The sanctuary was a record carved in stone, a long-term archive capable of surviving weather, invasion, and cultural collapse. Through its orientation and geometry, it preserved knowledge of solstices, equinoxes, star paths, and planetary movement. This kind of preservation suggested the builders expected their work to outlast them. They weren't leaving messages for their own generation, but for someone far in the future. A narrow passage led into the plateau's lower level, where a chamber had been cut directly into the rock. Inside, mineral flecks in the walls caught torchlight and reflected it in patterns resembling constellations. Some represented formations visible above the region. Others mirrored the clusters carved on the surface stones. Together, they formed a kind of star archive, one designed to be viewed in total darkness, where shapes would appear gradually as the torchlight shifted. The deeper one looked into the chamber, the more the patterns repeated with variations, suggesting long sequences of observation woven into the walls. The chamber walls bore no scenes of rulers or battles. Instead, they carried line after line of geometric shapes, triangles, circles, intersecting arcs. Their arrangement hinted at motion, balance, and recurring events. Some shapes corresponded to known celestial cycles. Others indicated periods far longer, patterns visible only after generations of patient tracking. Whoever worked in this chamber must have devoted years to gathering information, watching the sky night after night, marking each change with unwavering discipline. Yet the sanctuary's most unusual feature remained above ground. Near the edge of the plateau stood a cluster of pillars arranged in a broad arc. Unlike the central platform, these pillars weren't aligned to the sun. They pointed to specific points on the night sky, stars that rose in a sequence marking a particular season or cosmic event. Researchers later discovered that the arc formed a perfect match to the position of a constellation, as it appeared more than 1,000 years earlier. Time had shifted the stars since then, but the builders carved their moment into stone, creating a permanent record of how the heavens looked during their era. This plateau, secluded and silent, represented one small example of a global trend. Across continents, early civilizations designed structures with the same intent: to align with the heavens, to measure celestial cycles, and to preserve knowledge in a durable form. They acted independently, separated by oceans and mountain ranges. Yet they reached similar conclusions, about the importance of the sky. Their structures worked as calendars, observatories, and markers of rare astronomical events. Events that carried meaning deeply rooted in their cultures. This shared architectural language raised an important question. How did so many societies, with different languages, customs, and beliefs, develop the same desire to embed the sky into their stonework? Why did they all attach significance to rising stars, equinox shadows, and celestial cycles lasting far beyond a human lifetime? It was as though they were responding to a memory, a teaching, or a warning passed down through generations, something that united them despite vast distances. For those who studied these sites, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The plateau offered a clear reminder that early architects weren't just building temples, they were recording information. The sanctuary captured the relationship between light and shadow, the motion of stars, and the cycles of the heavens, with a sophistication that demanded decades of observation. It was a structure made by people who valued precision, continuity, and the cosmic order above all else. As light continued across the plateau, the shadows shifted once more. The straight beam that marked the equinox slowly dissolved as the sun climbed higher. Stone returned to its quiet, unassuming form. But the sanctuary had already delivered its message for the day. Its builders created a monument that revealed itself only to those who watched carefully, only at certain moments, only when the sky cooperated. Whatever story they wished to tell was tied not to human presence, but to the movement of the cosmos. And this was only one site among many. Across the world, similar structures stood waiting in forests, deserts, mountains, and plains. Some had been studied for centuries. Others had only recently been discovered. All hinted at the same idea. Ancient civilizations were guided by an understanding of the heavens that went far beyond mere curiosity. They treated the sky as a source of purpose. They recognized patterns invisible to untrained eyes. And they built monuments meant to last long after their own cultures disappeared. The plateau, silent and remote, captured the spirit of that shared pursuit. It invited anyone who climbed its steps to look upward, to consider the cycles written across the sky, and to wonder what compelled early builders to create such enduring markers. Far from being relics of forgotten beliefs, these structures served as gateways, places where earth met sky, where observation met memory, and where ancient knowledge waited for someone willing to see it. As night settled over the plateau, the sanctuary transformed. The sharp lines seen under the morning sun softened, and the carvings took on a quiet glow as moonlight traced each ridge. With darkness came clarity. The builders had designed this place to speak to the sky, and under the stars, its intention felt unmistakable. What daylight suggested, night confirmed. The sanctuary was both a memory and a message. Civilizations across the world once believed that the sky was more than a canvas of moving lights. It was a domain of origin, a realm where powerful beings lived, traveled, or descended from when the world below needed guidance. These stories shaped the identities of entire cultures, and the similarities between them were striking. People separated by oceans, who never exchanged a word or a tool, crafted tales of luminous figures arriving from above, teaching skills, building structures, or establishing order before vanishing again. The plateau fit into that larger pattern. Its alignments, chambers, and carvings suggested an archive built for generations who looked upward, not in fear, but in expectation. The builders did not carve warriors, rulers, or domestic scenes. They engraved cycles, spirals, and constellations. They recorded arrival patterns, seasonal markers, and the motion of stars with a precision that revealed deep familiarity. For them, the sky was not distant, it was active. Across the world, similar beliefs flourished. In fertile valleys, storytellers described serpent-shaped lights descending through cloud banks. On the edges of mountains, myths told of radiant visitors who emerged during storms, their presence accompanied by thunder and wind. In coastal settlements, elders taught that knowledge had been given by beings who had mastered the heavens long before humans learned to navigate by stars. These stories were passed down as fact, not allegory, and though the dialects differed, the structure remained constant: arrival, instruction, departure. The plateau's underground chamber amplified this connection. The walls, filled with mineral flecks, reflected torchlight in moving constellations, creating the impression of standing inside a star field. The deeper the passage went, the more the patterns shifted away from recognizable formations. Some clusters represented star groups still visible today. Others mirrored patterns that could only be seen from different latitudes, or during periods when the Earth's axis held a slightly different tilt. Whether the chamber was meant to represent the sky as it once was, or the sky as it appeared elsewhere, the builders clearly valued continuity across generations. What made these ruins especially captivating was the absence of everyday life. No objects of trade, no remnants of dwellings, no evidence of prolonged occupation remained. The sanctuary appeared to serve one purpose: to preserve information. It functioned as a place where rituals tied to celestial events could be observed, and where stories rooted in the heavens could be retold with accuracy. A traveler arriving here long ago would not have come for shelter or commerce. They would have come to witness something at a specific time, aligned with a specific event and meant to be remembered. This site was not alone in that intention. In distant jungles, great temples produced serpentine illusions during equinoxes, as if replaying the descent of a sky-born figure. Across desert regions, tall monoliths marked the rising of stars that served as seasonal guides for survival. In mountain ranges, astronomers carved ledges into cliff faces to track the motion of the moon. Every one of these places reflected a shared understanding that the heavens shaped the rhythms of life. The plateau added another layer to this narrative. Its carvings didn't simply track the sky, they interpreted it. Spirals connected to constellation lines, arcs intersected with seasonal markers, and clusters of dots indicated moments of return or transition. This combination of geometry and mythology suggested that the builders saw the sky not as a distant curiosity, but as a cycle with meaning woven into its movement. They carved these patterns because they believed the heavens signaled change long before it reached the earth. These beliefs were preserved through generations by stories that became the backbone of cultural identity. In many traditions, the origin of civilization began with a descent, someone or something arriving to lift humanity out of confusion. In some stories, knowledge arrived as a gift. In others, it came as correction or renewal. Even in cultures with no monumental architecture, oral traditions repeated the same central idea. Humans did not learn everything alone. The sanctuary's stonework mirrored this idea with subtlety. One carving showed a long arc descending toward a cluster of spirals, as though representing a movement from sky to earth. Another carving intertwined two celestial paths, crossing at a point marked by a small circle. Interpreted by modern eyes, these shapes could be astronomical records. Interpreted by ancient eyes, they may have represented encounters remembered long after their causes were forgotten. Travelers who visited the sanctuary likely brought their own stories with them. Pottery shards and pigments found nearby connected the site to groups from different regions. Each group carried myths shaped by their own landscapes, but linked by a shared theme: origin stories pointing upward. Around communal fires, these travelers may have compared tales, some describing serpents of light, others recalling bright visitors who taught agriculture or architecture, others repeating legends of beings who returned to the heavens through pillars of fire or sound. The plateau became a gathering point, not just for observers, but for storytellers. With its star-aligned pillars and echoing chambers, it provided a setting where stories and measurements blended into a larger worldview. The sanctuary did not simply track celestial events, it offered a physical space for understanding them. The builders created a place where the movement of the sky could be seen, interpreted, and connected to the stories carried by those who arrived from afar. As night deepened, the sanctuary embraced the sky fully. The arc of pillars caught the rising constellation they had been crafted to mirror centuries ago. The central platform darkened until it became part of the shadowed earth. The polished slab reflected starlight upward, turning faint engravings into glimmers, visible only at certain angles. Everything about the site worked quietly, as though performing a routine older than any surviving myth. Across the world, ruins like this shared a similar quiet performance. They were built to last, to communicate, and to remind. Their architects used stone as a language that could outlive their voices. The sanctuary on the plateau stood as one more example, a place where ancient builders sealed their observations and stories into the ground so the next generations could inherit them. The sky above held the same constellations it had offered their ancestors, though shifted slightly by the slow drift of time. Beneath those constellations, the sanctuary continued its patient dialogue, inviting anyone who reached it to watch the heavens with the same discipline that once shaped entire civilizations. In its silence, it still carried the stories of those who believed the sky had played a direct role in shaping the world below. Every night, under stars that watched for thousands of years, the sanctuary delivered the same message it had always carried: look upward and remember. Afternoon light slid over the plateau and revealed the long spine of a distant ridge where another ancient structure stood, one far larger, far more deliberate, and far more demanding. Unlike the sanctuary on the high plain, this monument had once been the heart of a thriving settlement. Its steps rose in a steady ascent toward a flat summit, and each tier angled with such precision that even today its corners aligned nearly perfectly with the movement of the sun. From the valley below, the structure looked like a mountain carved by human hands. But from its summit, the sky itself seemed close enough to touch. Approaching its base, the scale became overwhelming. Blocks of stone lay fitted against one another without mortar, their edges so tight that thin blades could not slide between them. The builders shaped each block with an understanding of weight, balance, and stress that implied centuries of accumulated expertise. Yet no smaller prototypes had ever been discovered. The monument rose fully formed, as if its creators had learned through instruction rather than trial. Scholars studying its orientation noticed something unusual. The monument did not point to a single celestial event, it pointed to several. Its eastern staircase aligned with dawn on one solstice. Its western face caught the last light of the opposite solstice. The northern and southern edges framed the path of specific stars that drifted across the night sky at particular seasons. All these alignments suggested a society not only observing the heavens, but building with a confidence that the sky's rhythms would remain consistent for generations. The monument's upper platform reinforced that conclusion. Here, a series of carved lines formed a grid that seemed to chart the progression of the seasons. Small depressions in the stone acted as receivers for shadows cast by standing pillars. At different times of the year, the shadows moved across the grid in a predictable arc, marking the shift from planting cycles to harvest periods. The grid was not decorative. It was a tool, a permanent, unchanging calendar carved into the city's highest point. Standing on that summit, one could imagine how people once gathered to observe these measurements. They would watch as the sun reached a particular angle, see a shadow fall into a carved depression, and understand that a new phase of the year had arrived. This wasn't simple curiosity. It was engineering shaped by necessity and reverence. The builders measured the heavens to keep their communities in harmony with the cycles that sustained life. Yet the monument's significance extended beyond agriculture. Embedded along its outer walls were spirals, crosses, and arcs arranged in sequences mirroring celestial patterns. These carvings hinted at a deeper relationship with the sky, a belief that the world above shaped events on the world below. Entire cultures built their calendars around these patterns, trusting the heavens to guide decisions about movement, ceremony, and leadership. The monument captured this belief in stone, preserving a worldview where astronomy and daily life were inseparable. Not far from the central monument, a series of smaller structures formed a ring of observatories. These stations faced different directions and tracked various celestial bodies. One station framed the rising of a star, long associated with renewal. Another captured the transit of a planet believed to govern cycles of prosperity. A third aligned with a cluster of stars that marked the beginning of a ceremonial season. Each station served a distinct purpose, but together they formed a network, a complete system for interpreting the movement of the sky. The builders achieved this without metal tools or modern optics. They relied on patience, observation, and architectural ingenuity. By sight alone, they tracked cycles that lasted decades. They learned the patterns of stars that shifted slowly over time. They noticed rare alignments that appeared only once in several generations. Such knowledge required more than careful watching. It required continuity. One group began the observations, recorded what they saw, and handed the responsibility to the next. The monument served as the physical link between these generations, reminding each one to continue the work of those who came before. The precision of these alignments raised deeper questions. How did a civilization with limited resources measure angles with such accuracy? How did they carve stones that remained stable for centuries? Why did they choose to encode astronomical data in structures meant to last far longer than any of their rulers? The answers were not written anywhere. The builders left no written explanations. They allowed the stones to speak for them. Some researchers believed that this monument, like many others around the world, acted as the central hub of a larger learning system. Its builders understood that knowledge of the heavens brought predictability to their lives. They could anticipate seasonal changes long before they arrived. They could prepare for droughts or floods by observing shifts in solar paths. They could plan ceremonies timed to celestial events that held deep cultural meaning. The monument ensured that these insights would never be lost. The nearby valley held evidence of how this knowledge shaped daily life. Crops were planted in patterns that mirrored the star sequences carved into the monument. Homes were built along lines that followed the same angles used in the summit grid. Ceremonies were conducted at times marked by specific celestial transitions. The community did not merely observe the heavens, it lived according to them. As centuries passed, the monument endured even as the society around it changed. Rulers rose and fell. Wars came and went, but the structure remained. later generations continued to use it as a calendar and observatory. Travelers arriving from distant regions recognized its purpose immediately. They compared its alignments to the ones they knew from their own lands, sometimes finding remarkable similarities. These encounters strengthened the idea that civilizations separated by oceans shared a common understanding of the sky. Across the world, the same pattern appeared: massive stonework, precise solar alignments, and astronomy woven into every aspect of life. In desert regions, monoliths cast shadows that moved like clock hands across stone rings. Along riverbanks, temples were positioned to catch the first light of equinox dawn. In mountain passes, towers framed constellations during key ceremonial nights. The builders of these sites were not connected by trade or language, yet their architectural choices carried the same logic. They built for the sky. The monument on the plateau's sister ridge belonged to this global family. Its builders created not only a physical structure, but a conceptual one, a lens through which generations could interpret the heavens. They engineered their world so that the movement of the sky was never hidden, never forgotten, and never dismissed as coincidence. They believed the heavens communicated through cycles, and they responded by carving those cycles into the earth. During certain nights of the year, the summit grid still caught starlight in the way its builders intended. Shadows cast by the remaining pillars traced gentle arcs across the stone, replicating the same patterns that guided the earliest observers. Even though much of the surrounding city had vanished, the monument continued its quiet purpose. It was a reminder that the builders understood time not as a fleeting concept, but as a repeating narrative written above them. The structure stood as evidence of a worldview where the sky served as both teacher and map. Each alignment, each carving, each precisely angled wall supported the idea that the world above shaped the world below. The builders measured these patterns not for entertainment or curiosity, but because they believed them essential to understanding their place in the universe. As dusk fell again across the valley, the monument's silhouette merged with the ridge behind it, becoming part of the land. Yet its purpose remained intact. Anyone climbing its steps today would feel the same sensation the builders intended long ago. The feeling of standing in a place designed not to honor a ruler or commemorate a victory, but to connect humanity with the rhythm of the heavens. And this was only the beginning of what the ancient architects achieved. Their understanding of the sky would stretch far beyond these walls, influencing stories, rituals, and entire civilizations that embraced the belief that the heavens were not distant or indifferent. They were the guiding force behind everything they built. Wind moved through the remains of an old mountain settlement, carrying dust across terraces carved into the slope. Here, high above the valley floor, another structure stood, smaller than the immense monument from earlier, yet somehow more unsettling. Its stones were arranged with such precision that the entire building looked untouched by time. Even after centuries of exposure to storms, sun, and erosion, the blocks fit together with an accuracy that exceeded anything expected from a civilization with limited tools. Approaching the structure revealed the first oddity. The stones were massive, some weighing several tons, yet they sat balanced on narrow ledges cut directly into the rock face. No mortar held them together. Instead, each block fit into the next, through interlocking cuts shaped like angles, slots, and grooves carved so perfectly that the walls seemed to merge into one continuous surface. How these stones were lifted to such a height was a question the site offered no answer to. The builders did more than move massive blocks. They shaped them into forms that resisted earthquakes, harsh winds, and shifting soil. each angle aligned with a specific celestial direction. One wall faced the rising of a bright star, visible only during certain seasons. Another wall pointed toward a constellation associated with renewal in the region's mythology. At night, the entire structure acted like a star map frozen in stone. Even without inscriptions, the design spoke clearly. This place was not built for shelter. It was built for observation. Inside, the structure's chambers offered further puzzles. The walls were polished smooth, not with sand or rough tools, but in a way that suggested the use of materials capable of grinding stone with remarkable consistency. The ceilings slanted at precise angles, directing airflow through the rooms in a steady, controlled draft. This flow allowed torches to burn evenly, revealing engravings etched into the surfaces. The engravings formed a sequence of symbols, some geometric, others resembling animals or celestial shapes, that guided the eye from the entrance to the inner sanctuary. One chamber contained a shallow basin carved directly into the floor. When filled with water, the basin formed a perfect mirror. In its reflection, the ceiling's carvings merged with the sky, visible through a narrow slit cut into the wall. The result was a composite image where the stars above and the engravings below appeared to connect. Such a design required meticulous planning. The builders needed to know exactly where the stars would appear on specific nights, and how their reflections would merge with the internal carvings. They designed the chamber as a device for understanding cycles that repeated over decades. Outside, a narrow walkway hugged the mountain's edge. Along this path stood a sequence of pillars shaped into thin silhouettes. Their placement indicated a clear purpose. Each pillar framed the rising of a celestial body at a specific time of year. One pillar aligned with the winter solstice sunrise. Another marked the first appearance of a planet after months of absence from the sky. The pillars formed a calendar woven into the landscape, turning the mountain into an astronomical instrument. The walkway ended at a ledge overlooking the valley. Here, a vertical stone slab stood anchored into the ground. Its surface bore a series of holes drilled at different angles. When viewed from behind, the holes framed patches of the sky like small windows. As the year progressed, different stars passed through these holes, marking time with a precision that surprised researchers who later studied the site. These holes were not random. They served as markers for observing the slow drift of the heavens across generations. The builders of this mountain site demonstrated a mastery of both engineering and astronomy. Yet their origins remained mysterious. No records explained their methods. No smaller prototypes showed the evolution of their techniques. Instead, they seem to have appeared with full knowledge of how to work stone, align structures, and carve astronomical paths into rock. Their cities rose quickly, flourished, and then vanished, leaving behind architecture that continued to function long after the culture itself dissolved. The mountain's proximity to other nearby ruins suggested a network of related sites. In the valley below, remnants of circular plazas indicated gathering places used for ceremonial purposes tied to the observatory. Terraced fields arranged in geometric patterns hinted at agricultural planning based on celestial cycles. Even the placement of homes followed a layout influenced by the movement of the sun. This created a community where daily life unfolded in harmony with the sky's rhythm. Across the world, similar patterns appeared in other ancient centers. In distant jungles, plazas aligned with equinox shadows produced illusions of descending figures. In arid plains, standing stones cast long lines across the ground during solstice sunsets. Farther across the ocean, vast rings of monoliths served as calendars, marking lunar cycles that stretched across years. These structures were built by cultures separated by oceans and generations, yet each one revealed the same idea. The sky dictated the architecture. What made the mountain site unique was its isolation. No major city surrounded it. No trade routes passed near it. It stood apart, built by a group that valued solitude and precision. This isolation suggested that the structure served a specialized purpose, perhaps reserved for astronomers, priests, or observers who needed a clear view of the heavens without interference. The altitude provided a vantage point free of fog and dense air, making it possible to see celestial events with clarity. The inner sanctuary offered another clue to the builder's intentions. Its walls contained deep grooves that funneled sound toward the center of the chamber. When a voice spoke within it, the sound amplified and echoed in patterns that felt deliberate. The chamber may have been used for rituals that involved spoken recitations timed to the movement of stars. Or perhaps the acoustics helped observers communicate over distances during nighttime measurements. Whatever the purpose, the design demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how architecture could shape sound. The structure's roof was even more remarkable. Built from long, flat stones, arranged with seamless precision, it sloped at an angle that allowed rainwater to run into channels carved into the outer walls. These channels directed the water into reservoirs lower on the mountain, ensuring a controlled supply even during dry seasons. This combination of practical water management and celestial alignment showed that the builders blended utility with symbolism. The roof protected the inner sanctuary, while also serving as part of the larger network of astronomical lines. Travelers who visited the site in later centuries recognized its uniqueness. Some described the mountain as a place where the earth reached upward to greet the sky. Others believed the builders had received knowledge from distant regions or from teachers whose identities were later lost. Over time, stories grew around the mountain, suggesting it had been a place where wisdom descended into the world. These stories preserved fragments of memory long after the original purpose faded. Night revealed the mountain's brilliance. Under a clear sky, the pillars framed star paths with astonishing accuracy. The holes in the stone slab aligned with constellations the builders had studied centuries earlier. The water-filled basin reflected the heavens in perfect symmetry. Even the walkways, carved into the rock at demanding angles, guided footsteps toward vantage points where celestial events unfolded. Such precision across multiple features suggested more than trial and error construction. It suggested intention, an understanding of the sky, not simply as a collection of lights, but as a system with order, rhythm, and meaning. The mountain site stood as evidence that ancient architects approached their work with a world view rooted in celestial observation. As dawn approached, the structure slowly emerged from shadow. The first rays of sunlight struck the eastern wall, igniting the carvings etched into the stone. Spirals lit up in a slow sequence, each one catching the light at a different moment. This sequence acted like a signal, marking the beginning of a new day and reminding observers that they stood in a place where the earthly and the celestial worked in unison. The mountain site, with all its precision and mystery, remained a testament to a time when people built not merely for shelter or ceremony, but to create a bridge between themselves and the heavens. Every stone spoke of a dedication to understanding the sky, and every angle reflected an intention shaped by cycles that governed the lives of those who once walked these paths. What these builders achieved echoed across civilizations. It challenged assumptions about what early societies understood, how they measured their world, and why they carved symbols meant to last long after their voices were gone. The mountain stood not just as a ruin, but as a preserved fragment of a worldview where knowledge was carved into stone, and where the sky served as the ultimate blueprint for creation. Night settled over the landscape, and with it came a shift in atmosphere that ancient people would have recognized immediately. When the stars emerged, so did the stories that bound communities to their past. These stories traveled across deserts, jungles, plains, and islands, shaping identities long before written records existed. They weren't whispered as fairy tales or framed as imagination. They were presented as history, events witnessed, recorded in memory, and preserved by repetition. Across continents, the central characters of these stories appeared in strikingly similar forms. Some were serpentine, made of light or shimmering scales, moving through the sky with an effortless grace. Others were described as radiant beings, their bodies glowing with a brilliance too intense to look at directly. In mountain regions, storytellers recalled figures wrapped in wind and thunder, stepping down from cloud banks as if descending a staircase. In coastal settlements, elders spoke of visitors whose arrival lit the sea in shimmering hues, pushing waves aside as though parting them intentionally. Every region had its own variations, but the patterns repeated: descent from the sky, instruction and departure. These beings arrived during turning points, moments when agriculture shifted, architecture advanced, or a community faced uncertainty. Their presence was often described not as a visitation, but as a return, as though they had been known before. Some groups referred to them as ancestors. Others saw them as caretakers. A few believed they were intermediaries between the human world and realms beyond. One story from a fertile valley described a serpentine figure that appeared each spring, gliding across the sky in a ribbon of pale light. Its arrival marked the beginning of planting season, and its path matched a constellation that rose just before dawn. When villagers saw the first star in that constellation break through the horizon, they believed the serpent had returned to guide them again. Over time, the serpent's path became encoded in their architecture. Buildings faced the direction of its rising, and ceremonial plazas aligned with its seasonal appearance. Far to the east, in regions where mountains rose in jagged spines, another tradition recounted a radiant visitor whose arrival coincided with violent winds. According to the story, villagers saw a glowing figure descend through the clouds, its arrival accompanied by a deep tone that echoed across the valley. The figure taught them how to mark time using the movement of shadows, and instructed them to carve ledges into cliffs so they could track the sun's arc. Once the lessons were complete, the figure rose back into the clouds and vanished without a trace. Generations later, those cliff ledges remained in use, perfectly shaped to measure solstices and equinoxes. Across the ocean, island cultures preserved stories of luminous beings who descended at night, their bodies shimmering in blue and white light. They were said to walk across the sand without leaving footprints. These beings taught navigation by the stars, showing sailors how to identify constellations that aligned with seasonal winds. Oral traditions explained that before these lessons, sailors rarely traveled beyond sight of their own shores. Afterward, voyages stretched across vast distances, linking islands that had once seemed impossibly far apart. Even in cultures separated by enormous spans of time, the same motifs appeared. In ancient river civilizations, archives described figures wearing elaborate headpieces shaped like serpents or birds. Their garments were often shown with patterns that resembled feathers or scales, symbols associated with movement between the heavens and the earth. Some engravings depicted the figures standing atop platforms that extended toward the sky. Others showed them emerging from bright shapes carved in angular patterns, as though stepping out of vessels unfamiliar to the artists. These depictions weren't restricted to one style of art. They appeared in stone carvings, clay tablets, woven tapestries, and painted murals. In each medium, the artists portrayed the figures with a sense of awe, elongated proportions, radiant halos, or stylized wings. Whether these artistic choices were literal interpretations or symbolic expressions remained impossible to determine. What mattered was that each culture treated these beings as real. Myths that included serpents weren't always tales of danger. In many traditions, serpents symbolize transformation and rebirth. When serpentine beings descended from the sky, communities saw them as heralds of change. The serpent's path across the sky often mirrored the movement of a constellation, whose seasonal rising brought new opportunities or warned of difficult weather ahead. In this way, celestial observation intertwined with mythology until the two became inseparable. Dragons played a similar role in regions farther north. Though often imagined in modern times as monstrous creatures, their earliest representations were different. They were long-bodied, flexible, and often depicted in positions reminiscent of clouds or wind currents. Some stories describe dragons as protectors who visited mountaintops during pivotal eras. Others saw them as messengers who delivered knowledge through chosen individuals. Carved stones on high peaks marked the supposed landing places of these beings, shaped with unique cuts that caught light at specific angles during certain seasons. Radiant figures carried another layer of meaning. Their descriptions emphasized brightness, heat, and movement. Some accounts portrayed them as human-shaped, but wrapped in light so intense that their true forms were impossible to discern. In many traditions, these beings arrived during transitional periods, after natural disasters, during times of famine, or in the wake of internal conflict. Their guidance often centered on establishing order, introducing calendars, or reorganizing communal roles. In some regions, the radiant figure was associated with the sun, while in others, it was tied to a star or planet that held particular significance. These stories weren't isolated to remote or uncontacted groups. They appeared in early civilizations known for complex architecture, written records, and advanced mathematics. Their myths blended seamlessly with their astronomical observations. Celestial paths became stories of journeys. Constellations became representations of beings who moved across the sky with purpose. A star's disappearance behind the horizon turned into a departure story, and its reappearance marked a return. The universality of these patterns raised compelling questions. Why did so many cultures choose serpents, dragons, and luminous figures to describe skyborne beings? Why did the stories appear in civilizations that never interacted? And why did the stories consistently link these beings to knowledge? Agriculture, architecture, navigation, astronomy. The plateau's sanctuary and the mountain observatory offered part of the answer. Both sites encoded celestial information in structures meant to last centuries. Their builders believed that the sky held meaning beyond simple observation. They crafted monuments that became repositories for cycles that stretched across generations. These cycles shaped their stories, and their stories shaped their identity. The radiant visitors and serpentine figures may have been expressions of celestial motion personified by ancient observers, or they may have been interpretations of rare natural events, meteors, comets, or atmospheric phenomena that left a deep impression. Another possibility preserved in whispers through time, suggested that these stories described encounters remembered long after the details blurred into symbolism. What mattered most was how these beings shaped civilizations. Their presence in myth encouraged the building of observatories, the carving of celestial paths, and the pursuit of long-term cycles that guided daily life. The stories became frameworks that allowed early societies to understand their world in a structured way. Through myth, astronomy gained cultural weight. Through astronomy, myth gained physical form. Night often served as the bridge between these worlds. Under the stars, ancient people watched the heavens and retold the stories that anchored their societies. They saw the sky not as an unreachable expanse, but as a realm connected to their own. The luminous beings, serpents, and dragons were not distant fantasies. They were companions, representations of forces that shaped seasons, guided choices, and offered a sense of continuity. The more closely the stories were examined, the clearer the connection became. These myths weren't merely centered on awe, they carried instruction. The beings they described brought knowledge of planting cycles, architectural foundations, navigation techniques, and celestial patterns essential for survival. They acted as teachers, and their presence in collective memory persisted long after the physical monuments weathered. Across continents, early civilizations built great structures that encoded these stories into stone. The builders carved their understanding of the sky into walls, pillars, and stairways. They shaped their world to mirror the heavens, connecting myth with astronomy and daily life with celestial rhythm. And behind all these efforts stood the belief that the sky had once reached down to the earth, not metaphorically, but in a way that left marks still visible to this day. Even as stories of serpents and radiant beings spread across regions, another pattern took root in the memories of ancient civilizations, one centered not on spectacle, but on instruction. In these tales, the visitors who descended from the sky did not arrive to rule or conquer. They came to teach. Their lessons shaped entire cultures, and the knowledge they shared became the foundation on which early societies built their survival and identity. Many groups believed that the world had undergone cycles of destruction and renewal, and that at the beginning of each new age, teachers arrived from above. In one tradition, these figures emerged during a period when the land had grown silent and disordered. People wandered without structure, relying on instinct rather than method. According to the story, a luminous teacher appeared and introduced the concept of seasons, showing the people how the sky's movement aligned with the rhythms of life. Once the lessons were taught and the first rituals established, the teacher vanished into the distance, leaving behind a society transformed by understanding. Farther south, communities living near river deltas told of a sage who arrived bearing symbols no one had seen before. The sage instructed them in counting, measurement, and the use of shadows to track time. These lessons led to the creation of their earliest calendars. The people believed the sage had emerged from a radiant vessel that descended near the river, leaving impressions in the ground that became sacred sites. Generations later, temples rose on those spots, their walls covered with carvings that imitated the symbols the sage had drawn in the soil during the first meeting. Mountain civilizations carried a different version of the teacher figure. They spoke of a visitor wrapped in shimmering garments who appeared at the peak of their highest summit. This figure taught them how to carve terraces into the mountainside, allowing crops to grow with greater stability. The terraces still existed centuries later, each one aligned with a specific angle of sunlight that ensured proper growth throughout the year. The people credited the design to the visitor, whose knowledge turned steep slopes into fertile ground. Across the sea, island cultures believed that their navigational skills originated with a group of sky-descended teachers. These visitors were said to possess deep knowledge of the stars, using constellations as pathways across the ocean. They taught islanders how to judge the shape of waves, how to read the wind, and how to navigate long distances without sight of land. Once the lessons were complete, the teachers set sail and disappeared beyond the horizon. Their students carried the knowledge forward, turning their islands into centers of seafaring culture. What connected all these traditions was the idea that the teachers did not intend to stay. They arrived, offered what was needed, and departed after ensuring the people could sustain themselves. Their departure often carried a promise, sometimes spoken, sometimes implied, that they would return when conditions required. This expectation of return shaped rituals, ceremonies, and architectural choices for centuries. Entire monuments were designed around the belief that the sky-born teachers would one day descend again. Some communities built markers that pointed toward a specific celestial event associated with the teacher's arrival. Others carved symbols into walls, indicating that a particular alignment would signal the time of return. Over generations, these symbols became part of the culture's identity, appearing in textiles, pottery, and ceremonial objects. The idea of return was never forgotten, even when the original meaning blurred into legend. In certain regions, the teacher figure became associated with transformation. One highland group believed their earliest teacher could shift between human form and a glowing sphere. This ability symbolized adaptability, the capacity to appear in different forms depending on what the people needed. The teacher's lessons focused on understanding cycles, the cycle of planting and harvest, the cycle of life and death, and the cycle of generations passing knowledge to those who came next. These lessons influenced the way the community organized leadership and tradition. They believed that each generation had a duty to preserve and interpret the teacher's wisdom. Meanwhile, in a desert civilization known for its monolithic architecture, a story circulated about a visitor who emerged from a radiant chamber that had descended from the sky. The visitor carried no weapons, only a series of long rods carved with unfamiliar symbols. According to the tradition, the rods displayed measurements that formed the basis for the civilization's earliest engineering. Builders used these measurements to align their structures with remarkable precision. The civilization later credited the visitor with teaching them how to harness mathematics for stability and balance, leading to monuments that stood through centuries of harsh climate. Other regions preserved memories of encounters that focused on unity. In one tradition, the sky-born teacher appeared during a time of conflict among tribes. The figure intervened not through force, but through demonstration. The people watched as the teacher formed patterns in the earth using simple stones, creating shapes that represented cooperation, direction, and shared purpose. The tribes adopted these patterns as part of their governance, using them to settle disputes and plan communal projects. The teacher's influence shifted the culture from chaos to collective harmony. Legends of return reinforced the significance of these encounters. Some traditions described specific signs that would mark the teacher's reappearance. A few believed the sky would brighten intensely in one direction. Others thought a particular star would rise in a pattern different from its usual path. Rituals developed around these predictions. Communities gathered during certain celestial events, watching the horizon for movement or unusual light. In many civilizations, architecture itself reflected the expectation of return. In desert regions, doorways were carved at angles pointing toward the rising of a star associated with the teacher. In forest settlements, platforms were built atop hills, so observers could watch for changes in the night sky. Mountain communities carved stairways that faced specific celestial markers. These constructions were not symbolic. They served as places where people could look upward and interpret any unfamiliar movement as a sign. Written records from later civilizations preserved echoes of these encounters. Scribes described beings whose appearance defied ordinary explanation. Figures who arrived with brilliance, moved without hesitation, and displayed knowledge that exceeded the capabilities of the cultures they visited. These records rarely framed the teachers as deities. Instead, they appeared as knowledgeable travelers whose purpose was to share insight rather than exert authority. The continuity of these stories across continents suggested a shared human focus on learning. Societies viewed knowledge not as something discovered in isolation, but as something passed down from those who came before. The teacher figure embodied that principle, a source of understanding arriving at a crucial moment. Whether the teacher was a literal visitor or a personification of discovery mattered less than the impact the stories made on culture. In many cases, the knowledge attributed to these figures directly influenced monumental architecture. Observatories, temples, and ceremonial structures aligned with celestial events, because the people believed the sky-born teachers used these events as guides. The builders, guided by stories, carved the lessons into stone. They turned memory into architecture and myth into mathematics. The expectation of return shaped generations. People continued to watch the sky, not merely to track seasons, but to await a sign that the teachers would walk among them again. Even as civilizations rose and fell, the stories endured. They moved from one generation to the next, embedded in ritual, architecture, and communal memory. Every culture carried its own version of the teacher's origin, purpose, and departure. But all agreed on one point. The world had once been visited by beings whose knowledge changed everything. And someday, when the signs aligned, those beings would return, bringing with them the same brilliance, the same guidance, and the same sense that the sky was not a distant place, but a realm deeply connected to the world below. The first light of morning reached the horizon, and across the plains, a cluster of ancient stone towers cast long shadows toward the west. Though weathered by centuries, their arrangement remained unmistakable, an arc carefully shaped to follow the sun's seasonal path. When the light struck their edges, each tower illuminated in sequence, as if reenacting a cycle that had guided generations. To anyone standing among them, the towers felt less like ruins and more like the gears of a forgotten clock. Civilizations across the world once built similar structures, monuments designed not for shelter or defense, but for tracking the passage of time. They watched the sky with a devotion few modern cultures could imagine, measuring years with shadows, seasons with stars, and entire ages with slow celestial shifts. The people responsible for such observations were more than astronomers. They were timekeepers, entrusted with translating the sky's movements into knowledge that shaped society. In one wide valley, a massive stone platform dominated the landscape. Its builders carved a long groove across its surface, aligned so precisely that sunlight filled it only on 2 days of the year. At dawn during the equinoxes, the groove filled with a narrow line of light that stretched from end to end, turning the platform into a luminous marker of balance. Villagers once gathered there to witness the moment, treating it as a signal that the seasons were shifting. The platform's design ensured that no generation would lose track of this turning point, no matter how much time passed. Farther south, a circular plaza served a similar purpose. Dozens of standing stones encircled its perimeter, each positioned to mark a different point along the sun's annual arc. At certain times of the year, the rising sun aligned perfectly between two stones, sending rays through the circle and illuminating a carved symbol on the central altar. This moment signaled the start of planting rituals, ensuring that crops were sown when the conditions promised the greatest success. The people relied on these alignments not simply for tradition, but for survival. Yet the ancient timekeepers did more than measure the sun. Many cultures devoted equal attention to the moon. One group, living in a highland region, built a series of terraces that framed the moon's position at different phases. When the moon rose in alignment with a particular terrace, it indicated a long-term cycle that renewed only every 18 years. Elders claimed that the terrace alignments allowed them to predict periods of intense rainfall or extended drought, knowledge crucial for planning the agriculture that sustained their communities. Elsewhere, a desert civilization constructed a series of monoliths that cast shadows across engraved pathways. During certain nights, the moonlight touched the pathways in patterns that mirrored its shifting phases. The builders studied these changes, recording each one in her traditions that preserved their understanding of lunar movement long after the structures themselves began to crumble. The sky was their calendar, and its cycles were memories preserved in stone. Some cultures observed cycles that stretched far beyond the span of a human lifetime. In regions where the night sky remained consistently clear, watchers tracked the slow drift of constellations across the horizon. They noticed that stars did not rise at the same point every year. Instead, their positions shifted slightly over generations. This movement, subtle and nearly imperceptible, became the basis for understanding precession, a cycle lasting thousands of years. The knowledge required patience, continuity, and a commitment to long-term observation. It reflected a worldview where time was not limited to a single life, but extended across centuries. One ancient city, known for its vast plazas and carefully aligned avenues, carried evidence of this long-term tracking. Its builders arranged the central walkway to point toward a star that rose in perfect alignment on a specific date during the era of construction. Today, that same star rises in a slightly different position. The shift revealed the builders' awareness of cycles long enough to outlast their own culture. They anchored their city to the sky as it existed during their time, creating a snapshot of the heavens carved into urban design. Near the sea, another civilization constructed massive stone observatories with horizontal slits that framed the horizon. These slits aligned with the risings of specific stars and constellations that served as markers for seasonal winds. Fishermen and navigators used the observatories to determine when currents would change, when storms were likely, and when long-distance journeys would be safest. The observatories combined architecture with practical knowledge, turning celestial events into tools for daily life. Even more complex systems appeared in forested regions. There, groups built wooden poles, arranged in precise patterns across open clearings. Though the poles decayed over time, their foundations revealed a sophisticated understanding of star cycles. Some poles aligned with the rising of a bright star associated with renewal. Others marked the setting of a constellation tied to the beginning of a ceremonial season. These alignments formed a calendar that adjusted naturally with shifts in the sky, requiring no written instructions or mechanical adjustments. The most impressive examples of ancient timekeeping often involved both sun and stars working together. One civilization constructed a stone chamber beneath a vast temple. A narrow shaft cut into the ceiling allowed sunlight to reach the chamber only on a single day of the year. At the same time, a carved marker on the wall pointed toward a constellation that rose above the horizon at that same moment. The builders aligned the chamber to celebrate a rare meeting between solar and stellar cycles, a meeting they believed held spiritual and cultural significance. These structures were not isolated achievements. They were part of a global pattern. In deserts, mountains, jungles, and coasts, early societies built monuments that transformed celestial cycles into physical markers. Their calendars were not written on paper or clay. They were carved into the land. They survived storms, floods, migrations, and the rise and fall of empires. This dedication to celestial tracking shaped the identity of the Timekeepers. They were not only observers, they were interpreters, tasked with explaining how the movement of the heavens connected to the rhythms of life. Their knowledge determined when to plant, when to build, when to travel, and when to perform rituals. They understood that neglecting the cycles could endanger the stability of their community. The Timekeeper's role often extended into mythology. Stories emerged around their knowledge, attributing its origin to beings who had arrived from above. Some believed that the first Timekeepers had been taught by visitors who understood the sky more deeply than humans ever could. Others saw the sky itself as a realm inhabited by ancestors who communicated through celestial events. These beliefs gave the Timekeepers a sense of authority that transcended ordinary roles. Over centuries, the physical monuments endured, even as the stories shifted. Some details were forgotten or changed with retellings, yet the structures continued to function. Even when new groups settled the land, they recognized the significance of the alignments. They adopted the monuments into their own traditions, relying on the ancient builders' precision to guide their understanding of time. In many regions, the monuments still work today. Solstice dawns continue to illuminate carvings exactly as they did centuries ago. Moonlight still traces paths across stone surfaces, shaped with uncanny accuracy. Stars still rise in alignment with pillars placed by hands long gone. The builder's knowledge survived the passage of time not through fragile manuscripts, but through stone shaped with purpose. Each site told a story not only of observation, but of intention. The Timekeepers didn't simply record celestial cycles. They ensured those records would outlast them. They built for permanence, believing that future generations would need the same guidance they once received. Their work demonstrated a profound respect for the sky, treating it not as a distant expanse, but as a system that shaped their existence. As daylight spread across the ancient tower field again, the sequence of shadows moved in perfect order. Each shadow reached its place just as it had for centuries. The Timekeepers may have vanished, but their instructions remained carved into the world around them. Through their monuments, the passage of time carried meaning. Through their alignments, the sky continued to speak. And through their legacy, the cycles that once guided ancient civilizations remained visible to anyone who cared to look upward. Late evening settled over the landscape, dimming the last traces of sunlight and bringing the first stars into view. Across a wide plateau, remnants of stone structures cast soft silhouettes against the fading sky. The carvings on their surfaces, though worn, still held traces of symbols that once communicated ideas far more complex than simple decoration. These symbols appeared in places where early builders expressed concepts tied not to daily life, but to the deeper structure of the world, cycles of time, movements of the heavens, and mysteries far beyond ordinary reach. In many ancient cultures, the people who interpreted these symbols carried an unusual status. Their knowledge extended beyond the rhythms of agriculture or the predictability of weather. They understood long-term cycles, subtle celestial shifts, and relationships between stars that changed only over centuries. Yet what puzzled later generations was how these early observers developed such insight without a clear lineage of learning. Their knowledge appeared suddenly, fully formed, without evidence of gradual discovery. One example came from a vast plain where a series of stone markers formed a long alignment stretching toward the horizon. These markers indicated the rising of a certain constellation at a specific moment in the distant past. Modern researchers, studying the positions, realized the builders had captured a celestial event that occurred thousands of years before the stones were erected. The knowledge required to reconstruct that position demanded either long-term tracking across generations or the inheritance of information from an earlier, unknown source. The culture left no written explanation. Its understanding appeared complete from the moment the stones were set. In a distant valley, another civilization carved astronomical sequences into cliff faces. These carvings recorded planetary cycles with surprising accuracy. One panel depicted the wandering of a bright planet that recurred over a lengthy span of years, repeating the same alignment only after a full cycle had completed. The builders carved the pattern in a way that implied they knew not only the cycle's start and end, but also how it repeated over multiple generations. There were no earlier versions of the panel, no rough attempts, no gradual refinement. The knowledge seemed to appear without origin. Farther north, a city known for its elaborate temples exhibited similar mysteries. Its observatory contained a chamber lined with symbols that marked the movement of distant stars. These symbols corresponded to cycles that could only be observed through careful, long-term study. Yet by the time the chamber was constructed, the city's written records made no mention of the years of observation such knowledge required. The chamber appeared as if the builders already understood the heavens in full, carving their insight into walls that would outlast them. The absence of earlier records puzzled scholars. The city's astronomical knowledge seemed to emerge fully mature. Some cultures preserved fragments of how this knowledge may have entered their world. Stories described individuals who arrived unexpectedly, carrying unfamiliar tools or symbols. They taught the people how to interpret the sky, then disappeared as quietly as they had come. These stories blended with mythology, leaving later generations unsure of where metaphor ended and memory began. Yet the monuments built afterward reflected precision that matched the tales. Whether these teachers were real individuals or symbolic representations of sudden enlightenment, the result was the same: knowledge that lacked a clear developmental path. The most striking examples came from civilizations that tracked cycles far beyond ordinary human experience. In certain coastal regions, observers knew that stars shifted slowly over centuries, due to the Earth's gradual change in orientation. This cycle, known today only through advanced calculation, was encoded in their monuments long before modern science recognized it. The builders aligned structures to reflect the star positions of their own era, fully aware that future generations would see them shift. The alignment acted as both marker and message, a way to communicate the passing of ages through architecture. Highland cultures displayed similar sophistication. They carved long parallel lines into stone platforms, mapping the movement of stars across the night sky. These lines marked patterns that repeated only after thousands of years. Yet the carvings lacked earlier attempts or experimental versions. They appeared precise from the start, as though their creators had been shown a complete map and simply transferred it into stone. Even the symbols themselves carried mysteries. Many cultures used spiral motifs to represent cycles, arcs to depict celestial paths, and dots arranged in clusters matching constellations. These symbols appeared in regions separated by immense distances, often with uncanny similarity. Though the meanings varied slightly across cultures, the core concepts remained the same. This raised questions about how such symbolic systems emerged in places without direct contact. Perhaps the similarities reflected a shared instinct for representation, or perhaps the symbols preserved teachings carried from an earlier age. Throughout these regions, certain calendars stood out for their precision. One civilization developed a system that tracked cycles lasting thousands of years, with accuracy difficult to explain. Their calendar measured the length of the solar year with remarkable precision, surpassing later systems adopted by more technologically advanced cultures. It also predicted rare celestial alignments that occurred only after long intervals. The people using this calendar credited its design to ancient ancestors who had received knowledge from sky-born teachers, though no physical records detailed how the system was developed. Another group living near dense forests created a calendar based on lunar and stellar cycles combined. They carved markers into stone pillars that indicated specific nights when stars would align with the moon's position. The system required knowledge of both lunar phases and the long-term movement of the stars. Yet the civilization's early structures showed no gradual improvement leading up to this achievement. The calendar appeared fully realized, woven into their earliest ceremonial sites. Throughout these stories, one theme persisted. Ancient knowledge arrived abruptly. Civilizations did not spend centuries fumbling toward precision. Instead, they demonstrated mastery quickly, then preserved their insights in stone, oral tradition, or ritual. The abruptness raised questions about how such advanced understanding emerged. It suggested that the roots of this knowledge stretched deeper than written history admitted. Over generations, social change, migration, and conflict obscured the origins of these systems. New leaders rose, new stories formed, and the early sources of knowledge faded into mythology. Yet the monuments and symbols endured, surviving long after their creators vanished. Even when the purpose of a structure was forgotten, its alignments continued to function. The sun still illuminated markers on specific days, and stars still passed between carved pillars. The knowledge embedded in the architecture remained intact, waiting for new observers to recognize its meaning. In many regions, people eventually reinterpreted these structures according to the beliefs of later eras. Some saw them as sacred sites left by deities. Others treated them as places of power, built by legendary heroes. Though the explanations changed, the structures themselves retained their precision. They were reminders of a time when communities understood the sky with an intimacy that modern life rarely invites. What made these ancient systems remarkable was not just their accuracy, but their durability. Knowledge encoded in writing could be lost, burned, or erased. But knowledge carved into stone endured across centuries. It survived collapse, conquest, and abandonment. It remained waiting for anyone who approached with curiosity and patience. As night deepened, the stars brightened above the plateau. The carved symbols on the ancient towers caught the faint light, reflecting ideas that once guided entire civilizations. The people who shaped these monuments believed the sky was not only a source of wonder, but a source of direction. They built structures that captured cycles stretching across ages, turning the heavens into a guidebook for those who would inherit their world. The origins of their knowledge remained hidden, preserved only in the precision of the monuments they left behind. Whether learned through observation inherited from earlier ages, or taught by visitors whose stories blurred into legend, the result was the same. A network of civilizations that measured time with remarkable accuracy, carving their understanding into stone so it would never be lost. Across the ancient world, these systems of knowledge formed the backbone of cultural identity. They shaped architecture, ritual, leadership, and daily life. They connected human experience to the movement of the sky. And though their origins were often mysterious, their influence remained unmistakable, embedded in the ruins, traced in carvings, and preserved in the rhythms of the earth and heavens. Shadows stretched across the valley floor as late afternoon light angled toward a ridge where an ancient city once stood. Most of its surface structures had collapsed long ago, leaving scattered blocks and eroded walls that gave little indication of the city's true scale. Yet beneath this weathered shell lay a world far more complex, an underground network of chambers, tunnels, and carved halls that revealed a different story. These spaces, hidden below ground level, preserved details erased from the surface by centuries of storms and shifting soil. The first hint of the underground city appeared when recent explorers noticed a faint depression near the ruins of a collapsed temple. The ground there rang hollow when struck, as though something vast rested beneath it. Excavations uncovered a carved entrance leading into the earth, a narrow passage supported by pillars that had withstood the collapse above. As the explorers followed the passage, they discovered a chamber that differed sharply from the ruined structures on the surface. The walls here were smooth, cut with deliberate precision, and arranged in geometric patterns that suggested a larger design. Light from their torches revealed carvings that had escaped erosion. These carvings depicted symbols associated with the sky, spirals, arcs, and sequences that traced the movement of stars and planets. Unlike surface inscriptions, which were weathered or incomplete, these were clear and sharp, revealing cycles mapped with confidence. Along the floor, thin grooves formed a grid that aligned with the corners of the chamber. When light struck the grooves at specific angles, faint reflections stretched across the walls in patterns shaped by the builders. Farther inside, the explorers entered a corridor that branched into 3 directions. Each branch led to a different hall, and each hall contained its own unique purpose. The first hall housed long stone benches carved directly into the walls. At the center stood a circular basin filled with crystalline deposits, as though water had once been stored here. The basin's shape suggested it served as more than a simple container. Its depth and polished surface implied it acted as a reflective pool, mirroring torchlight or moonlight filtering through narrow shafts above. These shafts, carved at precise angles, aligned with specific celestial events. When light entered the hall through the shafts, it struck the reflective basin and projected patterns across the walls. The builders had designed the entire space as a tool, an underground observatory where celestial cycles could be studied, even when weather obscured the sky above. The fact that such an observatory existed below the surface spoke to the builders' commitment to preserving accuracy. Stone walls insulated the chamber from wind, cloud cover, and shifting shadows. Here, the sky could be observed predictably, regardless of conditions. The second hall revealed a different purpose. Its floor was covered in a mosaic of tiles arranged into a sprawling pattern. Each tile bore a symbol that corresponded to a star or constellation. The tiles formed a map connecting these constellations to their seasonal positions. It was not a decoration, it was a teaching tool. Elders or astronomers may have used it to explain celestial cycles to apprentices, tracing the movement of stars across the map with their hands. The map extended to the edges of the hall, suggesting that knowledge of the sky held a central role in the community. Along the hall's walls, shallow shelves held fragments of clay tablets. Though many were broken, their markings resembled early forms of notation, lines, dots, and shapes arranged into sequences. These likely recorded important dates, ceremonial cycles, or predictions based on celestial events. The presence of written or symbolic records supported the idea that the underground chambers served not merely as observation spaces, but as archives where knowledge was preserved with care. The third hall carried an altogether different atmosphere. Its entrance was narrower, its ceiling lower, and its air cooler. Inside, a single pillar stood at the room's center. Carved with symbols of transformation and rebirth, the pillar served as a focal point for rituals associated with the cycles observed in the other chambers. Along the walls, niches held small stone figurines shaped as animals, celestial symbols, or hybrid forms that blended human and sky-themed features. These objects hinted at ceremonial practices tied to the movement of the heavens, suggesting that the people believed the cycles they studied were deeply connected to their spiritual world. What unified the three halls was their relationship to the world above. Each chamber reflected a different aspect of astronomical knowledge: observation, teaching, and ritual. Together, they formed a system designed to preserve understanding of the sky for future generations. The builders had enclosed their most important work underground, protecting it from the elements, and ensuring that their knowledge would endure long after their visible city decayed. This approach appeared in many regions across the world. Some civilizations built labyrinthine networks beneath their temples, using underground spaces to store knowledge or perform ceremonies tied to celestial events. Others constructed subterranean tunnels that aligned with specific points on the horizon. During solstices or equinoxes, sunlight entered these tunnels through narrow openings, illuminating symbols carved deep within. These underground alignments served as precise clocks, marking key moments in the year with unwavering accuracy. In mountainous areas, engineers carved chambers into cliff faces, using natural rock formations to reinforce their structures. These chambers often contained star maps or geometric carvings, similar to those found in valleys or plains. Their locations suggested that communities carried shared knowledge across distances, adapting it to their environment. Whether built beneath cities, within mountains, or under megalithic structures, these underground spaces demonstrated a deep reverence for the preservation of knowledge. Some tunnels connected multiple chambers and formed pathways that echoed celestial paths. In one region, a long corridor stretched beneath a series of surface temples, each surface structure aligned with a different constellation. Beneath them, the corridor branched into chambers that formed a mirrored pattern. This arrangement suggested that the builders saw the relationship between heaven and earth as more than symbolic. They designed their architecture to reflect this connection physically, creating an underground landscape that echoed the sky's layout. Other cultures used subterranean spaces for rituals tied to the cycles observed above. One group built underground halls, where participants gathered to reenact the creation stories associated with celestial beings. These stories described how the world transitioned between eras, guided by star patterns or sky-born teachers. The underground settings heightened the atmosphere, connecting the participants with the mystery and depth associated with cosmic cycles. When they emerged back into daylight, the experience reinforced the belief that their world mirrored the heavens in both structure and purpose. In some regions, underground structures served as shelters during extreme weather, yet their design still reflected astronomical understanding. Long stairways descended into chambers whose walls aligned with points where sunlight entered briefly during certain days of the year. These rare moments were treated as sacred, marking transitions in the calendar or signaling the beginning of new ceremonial periods. Even in spaces built for practical use, the builders incorporated symbols and alignments tied to the sky, demonstrating how deeply the cosmos influenced their worldview. The most remarkable aspect of these subterranean complexes was the care taken to preserve knowledge for future generations. Surface structures could crumble or be overtaken by vegetation, but underground chambers remained sheltered. Carvings remained intact, symbols retained their clarity, and alignments continued to function. In several regions, modern explorers discovered knowledge preserved underground that no longer existed on the surface. These discoveries offered rare insights into civilizations whose visible remains told only part of the story. As torches flickered against the walls of the ancient chambers, the carvings seemed to move with the light. Spirals shifted, constellations glowed faintly, and patterns on the floor reflected the depths of time. In these underground halls, the past felt present. The builders had created spaces where memory itself could rest, protected from the relentless passage of years. Across the ancient world, these hidden chambers formed a network of preserved knowledge, a record carved beneath the earth to outlast those who created it. Whether built as observatories, classrooms, archives, or ceremonial sanctuaries, they carried the same message as the monuments above. The movement of the sky shaped the movement of civilization. In the quiet, still air of these subterranean spaces, the stories and cycles that guided ancient societies continued to echo, waiting for anyone willing to descend into the earth and listen. Dawn rose slowly across the ruins, casting a pale glow over stone fragments that once formed a thriving ceremonial district. What remained above ground gave only hints of the world that once existed here. Yet the deeper researchers searched beneath collapsed plazas and shattered stairways. The more they realized that the visible ruins were only part of the story. The most valuable records, those that preserved beliefs, instructions, and histories, had been written not only in stone, but in perishable materials that rarely survived. And when later invaders arrived, even those fragile remnants disappeared. Across ancient civilizations, loss became a defining feature of knowledge. Tablets burned in fires meant to erase old traditions. Codices vanished during periods of conflict. Archives dissolved as migrating groups carried only what they could hold. Each loss shaped the fragments of history that survived, leaving modern observers with only glimpses of teachings once considered essential. In a river valley, not far from the underground observatory complex, a group revered for its astronomical insight preserved its records in folded books made of bark fibers. Each book contained charts of celestial cycles, lists of ceremonial days, and accounts of the sky-born teachers whose guidance had shaped their worldview. The books folded like accordions, allowing scribes to record long cycles across continuous sheets. For centuries, they served as the backbone of communal memory. But when a distant empire expanded into the valley, its rulers viewed the books as threats. To erase the valley's identity and impose new rule, they burned the archives. Only scattered references in stone carvings remained, symbols that hinted at the contents of books now lost forever. The destruction severed the connection between the people and the knowledge they had nurtured for generations. Oral traditions preserved some fragments, but the full system of cycles vanished with the flames. A similar fate befell another civilization known for its intricate glyphs. This group filled their codices with diagrams of celestial paths, predictions of rare events, and records of rituals performed at specific alignments. Their scribes used mineral pigments to create vibrant illustrations that blended myth with observation. Yet when foreign conquerors arrived centuries later, they interpreted these books as evidence of forbidden practices. Most were destroyed in a matter of days. Only a handful survived, hidden by those who recognized their value, or concealed in places overlooked by invaders. The loss of the codices left scholars with a puzzle. Stone monuments hinted at a complex understanding of the heavens, but without the written explanations, much of the context vanished. Alignments that once guided agricultural planning became enigmatic. Rituals tied to specific cycles became difficult to interpret. The codices had served as keys to understanding the architecture and ceremonial life of the civilization. Without them, the connection between sky, ritual, and daily life became fragmented. Elsewhere, along a coastal region shaped by cliffs and fertile plains, a different kind of loss occurred. This society stored its knowledge in wooden tablets carved with precise symbols. The tablets documented long-term cycles, genealogies, and the stories of luminous teachers who had visited in ancient times. When a natural disaster struck, winds and waves powerful enough to reshape the coastline, the archives vanished beneath the sea. Later generations told stories of a great library swallowed by the ocean, its teachings preserved only in scattered oral accounts. Despite such losses, traces of the knowledge persisted. Symbols associated with celestial patterns appeared on pottery, and woven textiles discovered far inland. Songs passed down through generations included verses that mirrored the cycles once carved into the tablets. Even after the physical records vanished, the community preserved fragments of its past through memory. This resilience demonstrated how deeply embedded the knowledge had been in everyday life. Some losses, however, resulted not from conflict or disaster, but from deliberate concealment. In mountain regions, priests or astronomers hid their records in sealed chambers within cliff faces. These chambers were carved carefully, locked with stone slabs that blended into the surrounding rock. Their creators intended the knowledge to resurface only when the time was right, during specific celestial events or periods of cultural renewal. For centuries, these chambers remained untouched, their contents waiting in silence. When explorers eventually discovered these chambers, the preserved materials offered remarkable insight. Though the records were incomplete, they contained diagrams showing how celestial events influenced rituals and leadership decisions. The chambers revealed that knowledge considered sacred had been protected intentionally, shielded from cycles of conflict that ravaged nearby settlements. The act of concealment underscored the value these societies placed on their connection to the sky. Elsewhere, invaders encountered traditions they did not understand and attempted to replace them. In certain regions, scribes recorded accounts of teachers descending from the heavens, accompanied by symbols depicting radiant figures or serpent-like forms. These stories conflicted with the conquerors' beliefs, prompting them to suppress or destroy the records. Entire libraries disappeared under orders meant to eliminate any trace of earlier cosmologies. The conquerors believed that erasing the stories would erase the identity associated with them. Yet the stories survived in other ways. Elders shared them during ceremonies held in remote locations, far from the reach of new authorities. They wove the stories into metaphors disguised as agricultural lessons or seasonal celebrations. What appeared to outsiders as simple rituals carried deeper meaning for those who understood the symbols embedded within. The stories continued in coded form, waiting for a time when they could be told openly again. In many regions, the loss of written records forced communities to rely solely on architecture to preserve knowledge. Monuments, temples, and underground chambers became the last repositories of ancient insight. A carved pillar might encode a cycle that once appeared in a codex. A shadow alignment might replace a written calendar. Stone carvings mirrored symbols from lost books, preserving their meaning through geometry and placement instead of text. Some cultures adapted by embedding memory into performance. Dancers reenacted celestial cycles through movement. Storytellers spoke of eras governed by star paths or the appearance of radiant visitors. Rituals aligned with solar or lunar transitions maintained the rhythm once recorded in fragile books. In this way, traditions survived even without their original written form. Yet the most intriguing testimonies came from individuals who claimed to have seen knowledge vanish in their own time. These witnesses described the disappearance of scrolls or books containing detailed sky charts. They spoke of teachers who warned that the knowledge must be protected and of efforts to move records to safer places. Their accounts, often recorded much later, suggested that the loss of ancient knowledge was neither accidental nor inevitable. It resulted from choices made during moments of crisis. Some testimonies described fear that the teachings would be misinterpreted or misused by those who did not understand their origins. Others recounted efforts to preserve knowledge through secrecy, hiding it from rulers who might destroy it. These accounts, though fragmented, emphasized the value placed on celestial understanding. The people believed that knowledge held power, enough to shape the fate of communities. In the end, the losses left gaps that modern researchers struggle to fill. Yet even in absence, the knowledge left fingerprints in the world. Alignments still work. Carvings still communicate. Underground chambers still reveal patterns that once guided ancient societies. Although the codices, tablets, and scrolls disappeared, traces of their teachings survive in stone, tradition, and story. The ruins that remained acted not only as reminders of what had been lost, but as incentives to rediscover the insights that once shaped civilizations. Beneath the earth, within mountain halls, and scattered across remote valleys, fragments of that knowledge waited. The past had been interrupted, but not erased. Every surviving structure carried a message, a memory of a time when people looked to the sky for guidance, and when their wisdom, preserved in fragile records, shaped entire worlds. Mist drifted across a wide valley, where the remains of an ancient stone ring emerged from the ground like the ribs of a long-buried creature. Though the structure had decayed over centuries, its original design was still clear. Massive pillars, arranged in a near-perfect circle, each angled with deliberate precision toward a point on the horizon. The monument belonged to a culture long vanished, yet its purpose echoed ideas found in distant regions, ideas replicated with eerie similarity across continents that never exchanged a single message. These similarities were not loose interpretations or symbolic parallels. They appeared in the foundations, angles, alignments, and architectural choices of sites separated by oceans, mountain ranges, and entire eras. Each site carried its own cultural expression, yet all followed the same underlying logic, a desire to mirror the sky on the earth. In a lush region to the west, a pyramid-shaped temple rose above the surrounding forest canopy. Its stairways aligned with equinox dawn, casting a descending pattern across the steps that resembled a serpentine movement. On the opposite side of the world, builders carved a similar effect into the face of a steep stone terrace. During specific days of the year, shadows fell in a wave-like rhythm along the terrace walls, creating the illusion of a creature sliding downward. Both structures used light and shadow to recreate celestial events tied to stories of skyborne beings. Farther north, a mountain sanctuary used a ring of pillars to frame the rising of a bright star that marked the beginning of a ceremonial season. Across an ocean, on windswept plains, a set of wooden posts once served the same purpose. Though the materials differed, the alignment matched. Both communities valued the star as a symbol of renewal, and both embedded its annual appearance into the layout of their ritual spaces. These architectural echoes spread even farther. In one desert region, a set of stone chambers formed a pathway leading through narrow corridors. The corridors were angled to ensure sunlight entered only during certain days of the year, illuminating symbols on the walls. Thousands of miles away, beneath thick jungle growth, an underground tunnel system performed a similar function. Sunlight filtered through shafts at precise moments, casting narrow beams that illuminated carvings tied to celestial cycles. The two cultures never encountered each other, yet they built structures that followed identical astronomical principles. The consistency raised questions that modern researchers struggled to answer. How did civilizations separated by vast distances conceive the same architectural solutions without contact? Why did they all choose to align buildings with the same celestial markers? And why did they embed stories of skyborne teachers and celestial beings into the structures that supported their calendars? One explanation pointed to the universality of the sky itself. People across the planet lived under the same heavens. They observed the same lunar phases, experienced the same solstices, and watched the same constellations rise and fall. Yet this alone did not explain the near-identical architectural patterns. Tracking the sun required only basic observation. Building multi-ton monuments that aligned with precision across long time spans required organization, engineering, and knowledge that could not be attributed to chance. Some researchers noted that these global similarities often centered on three primary themes: alignment to specific celestial bodies, symbolic representations of descent or ascent, and integration of myth into architectural design. The first theme appeared in countless structures. Builders encoded solar cycles into monuments with such precision that they functioned as clocks, calendars, and ceremonial markers. A platform in a coastal city faced a point on the horizon where a particular star rose once every 52 years. A stone archway in a mountain pass captured the rising of a constellation associated with transition. A circular pit in an island settlement aligned with the moon's rare extreme positions, marking a cycle known to repeat only after decades. The second theme, descent and ascent, surprised many who studied global architecture. In jungle regions, pyramid stairways depicted serpentine shapes descending from the sky through light and shadow. In desert complexes, carvings showed radiant figures stepping down through rays of sunlight. Along mountain ridges, sculptures depicted beings emerging from cloud banks. On distant islands, stories were carved into lava rock, showing luminous visitors descending from the heavens. Despite their differences, these images captured the same idea: skyborne beings interacting with the world below. The third theme, myth woven into architecture, was perhaps the most striking. Civilizations shaped their buildings around stories tied to the sky. A temple might represent the home of a radiant teacher. A series of plazas could reenact a story of descent and return. Underground chambers reflected cosmological beliefs through carvings and alignments. These stories were not afterthoughts added to completed structures. They influenced the design from the beginning. guiding how communities organized their sacred spaces. What made these patterns remarkable was how consistently they appeared in civilizations, with no shared language or trade. Even societies separated by oceans crafted structures with matching alignments and symbolic meaning. One group framed a star cluster believed to hold ancestral significance. Another treated the same cluster as the source of creation. Both built monuments oriented toward the cluster's rising. Whether the connection was coincidence or part of a shared ancient tradition remained a subject of ongoing discussion. Some regions preserved oral traditions that offered their own explanations. According to one highland culture, the ancestors had once received teachings from a group of luminous visitors who emphasized the importance of watching the sky. The stories claimed that the visitors demonstrated how to align structures with celestial events that connected the earthly world with cycles beyond it. The culture believed these teachings traveled across regions as people migrated, carrying the principles of alignment with them. Other regions offered similar stories, though expressed in different forms. In a coastal settlement known for its advanced navigation, elders told of sky-descended teachers who instructed early sailors. These teachers demonstrated how the stars formed pathways across the ocean. Once the lessons were absorbed, the teachers departed, leaving behind a tradition of observing celestial movements that later influenced architecture. Navigational knowledge and building design shared a common origin. In forest communities, stories of descent appeared more symbolically. Elders described serpentine figures made of light, descending during periods of renewal. Ritual spaces aligned with the points where these beings were believed to appear. Carvings on wooden posts depicted cycles that matched stellar movement, suggesting the architectural choices emerged from stories connected to celestial events. While modern interpretations varied, the architectural evidence remained consistent. Global civilizations built according to principles rooted in the sky. Whether these principles emerged independently or stemmed from shared ancient teachings, the result was a network of monuments that functioned as mirrors of the heavens. These shared patterns offered insight into how early people viewed their place in the world. They did not separate the earth from the sky. They saw themselves as part of a larger system shaped by cycles that extended far beyond a single lifetime. Their monuments acted as bridges, connecting their communities to the celestial rhythms they believed guided creation, renewal, and destiny. As evening settled over the valley, shadows lengthened across the stone ring. The pillars stood silent, yet the intent behind their placement remained clear. They were built by people who believed that the sky spoke through cycles, alignments, and patterns. And across the world, others listened to the same message, building their own monuments that echoed these timeless ideas. Though the builders never met, their works formed a shared language, one written not with words, but with stone aligned to the heavens. Even in regions where monumental architecture differed greatly, stories preserved by the people revealed a pattern as striking as any alignment of stone. Across distant continents, communities described origins shaped not by gradual discovery, but by encounters with beings who arrived from the sky. These stories were not faint echoes or vague suggestions. They carried specific details that reappeared in places separated by oceans, languages, and eras. The similarities were difficult to ignore. In a remote river valley, elders taught that their earliest ancestors came from a bright vessel that descended during a period of darkness. The vessel glowed like a second sun, illuminating the land as it slowed above the river's surface. From it emerged beings described as tall, radiant, and silent. They taught the people how to cultivate crops, how to mark time with the moon, and how to organize settlements in harmony with the seasons. After fulfilling their purpose, the beings rose into the sky and vanished, leaving behind the framework for the valley's earliest civilization. Thousands of miles away, in a mountain range shaped by sharp ridges and deep ravines, another group preserved a story nearly identical in structure. In their version, the visitors descended during a storm. Lightning flashed around them, and thunder rolled as the beings stepped onto a high summit. They carried symbols inscribed on smooth stone tablets. These symbols, according to the tale, revealed the principles needed to shape terraces and channels that allowed the mountain people to transform steep slopes into fertile fields. Once the new agricultural system flourished, the visitors returned to the sky, promising that their teachings would guide generations to come. Farther east, in coastal regions known for long-distance seafaring, navigators repeated stories their ancestors had guarded for centuries. These stories described luminous figures emerging from the horizon at night, walking across the water without sinking. The visitors pointed to stars, naming them one by one, creating pathways in the sky that revealed safe routes for ocean travel. They taught how to interpret wind patterns, how to read the shape of the sea, and how to build vessels capable of withstanding long voyages. The stories claimed that the visitors did not remain long. Once the sailors could navigate confidently, the luminous guides returned to the direction from which they came. These traditions, though separated by thousands of miles, shared key elements: sky descent, instruction, transformation, and departure. The teachers did not become rulers. They did not demand tribute. They arrived with purpose, imparted knowledge, and left without warning. Their teachings reshaped how entire societies understood the world, giving rise to systems of agriculture, architecture, and navigation that allowed civilizations to flourish. Even the symbolic descriptions shared uncanny similarity. Some groups emphasized serpentine imagery, long, flowing forms of light descending through cloud banks. Others described wings, not as feathers or limbs, but as radiant extensions that glowed with intense brightness. A few traditions depicted the visitors as human-shaped silhouettes, wrapped in brilliance so intense that their features remained hidden. Whether serpents, dragons, or radiant figures, the imagery centered on movement from above to below, and on a presence that seemed both familiar and otherworldly. These stories often blended seamlessly with astronomical cycles. In one highland community, elders timed their retellings to coincide with the rising of a particular star cluster. The cluster appeared once each year, and its rising signaled a period of renewal. The people believed the cluster represented the home of the skyborn teachers, and its annual appearance was treated as both reminder and ritual. Children gathered on hilltops to listen to the stories and learn the cycles that governed seasonal work. A desert civilization practiced a similar ritual, though in their case, the focus was on the moon. They believed that the teachers had arrived during a rare lunar event, when the moon turned a reddish hue and passed through a cluster of bright stars. To honor this moment, the people gathered around stone circles carved with spirals. They lit fires and recounted the teachings associated with the visitors. Ritual dances reenacted the descent, symbolizing the connection between sky cycles and knowledge. Even in forested regions, where the sky was often obscured, stories persisted. Elders described radiant beings descending through breaks in the canopy, accompanied by a deep hum that vibrated through the trees. The visitors taught healing techniques based on plants that grew only during particular phases of the moon. The people believed the visitors returned during massive storms, moving through the air as streaks of light. These stories shaped the forest community's rituals, encouraging careful observation of the moon, stars, and seasonal weather shifts. Despite the differences in local expression, the global patterns stood out. Each culture placed its origin within a celestial framework. Each culture credited its early advancements to guidance from beings associated with the sky, and each culture believed that the teachers had not vanished entirely. They had simply withdrawn, awaiting the right moment to return. This expectation of return influenced architecture, ceremony, and leadership. Some civilizations built plazas that faced the horizon, where the visitors were believed to have arrived. Others carved markers into stone, creating visual guides for future generations. In one region, a network of towers pointed toward a constellation associated with renewal, ensuring that the people always knew when the sky signaled an approaching change. In distant islands, fishermen built ceremonial platforms along cliffs. These platforms aligned with the rising of a star, linked to the original visitors. When the star appeared, the community reenacted the descent through dance, movement, and chanting. To outsiders, the rituals appeared symbolic. To the islanders, they were enactments of events that had shaped their world. Even today, traces of these identical myths linger. Some appear in the form of carved stones depicting figures surrounded by halos of light. Others survive in songs passed down through countless generations. A few remain embedded in ritual calendars that still mark the same celestial events, once tied to stories of descent. What made these myths extraordinary was not just their similarity, but their persistence. Long after the civilizations that created them collapsed, long after their cities were overtaken by soil or forest, the stories endured. They survived through memory, performance, and fragments carved into stone. They were reminders of a worldview shared across continents, a belief that humanity's earliest guidance came from above. And though the stories differed in detail, they all carried the same foundation. The sky had once touched the earth, and the world had never been the same. Morning fog drifted through the dense canopy as sunlight filtered onto a newly uncovered mound, hidden for centuries beneath layers of vegetation. The mound, at first glance, resembled nothing more than a sloping rise in the earth. But when the fog thinned and the silhouettes sharpened, the structure revealed itself in fragments, terrace edges curling beneath vines, staircases swallowed by roots, and stone blocks arranged in such consistent angles that coincidence seemed impossible. What had been dismissed for generations as natural terrain was, in truth, the upper shell of a long-buried complex built with purpose and precision. It was only recently that researchers began finding structures like this with increasing frequency. Tools capable of scanning through dense jungle, sand, and soil had transformed remote landscapes into maps of forgotten architecture. In many regions, what appeared on surface surveys as isolated ruins turned out to be only the visible fraction of sprawling cities. Entire road networks, ceremonial platforms, and observatories came to light. Some of these discoveries matched known histories. Others contradicted them completely. As these hidden sites emerged from obscurity, one theme repeated across continents. Ancient civilizations had built with a scale and intention that modern eyes had not expected. The newly uncovered structures often showed alignments as precise as those of their better-known counterparts. Stone pathways pointing towards solstice sunrise, stairways angled to capture equinox shadows, and walls oriented towards star clusters that marked seasonal transitions. Even the buried chambers mirrored the underground spaces found in more famous ruins, carved with symbols that unified ritual, astronomy, and memory. What surprised researchers most was the number of sites that appeared to be interconnected. They shared architectural principles despite vast geographic separation. A stone ring in a northern plain exhibited the same solar pattern as a series of pillars uncovered in a remote desert. A jungle complex revealed stairways that produced serpentine shadow movements, identical to those found thousands of miles away. Newly discovered mountain structures used the same angled light shafts seen in underground observatories on distant continents. Each new find strengthened the sense that early civilizations participated, knowingly or not, in a global dialogue shaped by the movement of the heavens. The consistency raised questions that had lingered for generations. How could distant societies, without shared language or contact, develop such similar architectural logic? Why did so many structures track the same celestial cycles? And why did traditions from each region preserve myths describing knowledge brought from the sky during ancient eras? As the discoveries multiplied, the lines between myth and architecture grew increasingly difficult to separate. Stories that once seemed symbolic gained new context. Legends of radiant visitors arriving during pivotal moments found echoes in carvings buried beneath collapsed temples. Tales of teachers who introduced agricultural knowledge aligned with inscriptions preserved in protected chambers. Even myths that described cycles of arrival and return matched astronomical patterns that the newly uncovered observatories had been designed to track. Some of the most compelling evidence surfaced in documents preserved by later civilizations. Scribes wrote of earlier ages when the world was guided not by rulers, but by individuals who understood the cycles of the heavens so completely that they shaped entire societies around them. These accounts often pointed to moments when knowledge emerged abruptly, periods when techniques, calendars, and construction methods appeared without clear development. It was as though the people of those eras had inherited a blueprint rather than created one. But the greatest shift in perspective came from modern tools. Scanning technologies revealed the underlying geometry of ancient cities with clarity impossible in earlier decades. They showed that many ceremonial complexes were part of far larger patterns, massive grids stretching across valleys, mountain ranges, and coastlines. Some of these grids aligned with celestial markers on a scale visible only from great heights. Observers realized the cities had been designed not just to serve their inhabitants, but to mirror the sky itself. In a mountainous region where thick clouds often obscured the terrain, one such discovery changed the way researchers interpreted the entire landscape. What looked like scattered stones across several peaks formed a pattern nearly identical to a constellation when viewed from above. Each peak held a carved platform positioned to align with a star's rising during a specific period. The pattern was too deliberate to dismiss. It suggested a civilization that not only observed the sky, but replicated it in the land, turning the earth into a reflection of the heavens. Another discovery surfaced deep within a desert, where shifting sands had hidden stone structures for centuries. When exposed, the structures formed a long corridor, pointing toward a distant horizon. At the end of the corridor stood a vertical slab with holes drilled through it. When researchers aligned their instruments with these openings, they discovered that the holes framed the positions of stars, visible during a long-term cycle that repeated only after many generations. The builders had created an instrument capable of tracking ages, a tool for measuring time far beyond the span of a single life. What connected all these discoveries was the sense that ancient societies operated with a deeper awareness of long cycles than modern societies often considered. They built for the ages, not for the moment. Their monuments stood as anchors in time, markers that remained faithful to the patterns they were designed to follow, long after those who built them were gone. As more hidden structures emerged, researchers also encountered artifacts that raised questions about the origins of early knowledge. Carved tablets preserved in sealed chambers displayed geometric patterns that mirrored the astronomical sequences mapped by the monuments. Some tablets portrayed events interpreted as celestial phenomena, bright objects descending, cycles of illumination and darkness, and figures emerging during rare alignments. While the meanings were debated, the connection between these tablets and the structures above them suggested a shared purpose: to document a relationship between heaven and earth that shaped identity, ritual, and understanding. In one remote forest, a newly found cave contained carvings of serpentine figures descending through rays of light. The imagery mirrored stories from distant cultures, yet the carving style differed entirely. It appeared to be an independent interpretation of the same motif, a belief in descent from above. Beside the carvings stood a group of stone markers arranged to capture a unique pattern of moonlight during a rare lunar event. The combination of carving and architecture implied that the builders commemorated something they considered real. These discoveries opened discussions about the scale of ancient understanding. They suggested that knowledge of celestial cycles was not limited to a few major civilizations, but spread across the world, preserved in different forms according to local needs and environments. It hinted at a time when the sky played a central role in shaping human development, influencing when communities planted, traveled, built, and told their stories. Modern explorers recognized a pattern emerging. Ancient civilizations encoded memory into the land itself. They built observatories into mountainsides, calendars into plazas, and celestial maps into underground halls. Whether through stone, shadow, or alignment, they preserved knowledge in ways that could not be destroyed by fire, flood, or invasion. Even when their written records vanished, the architecture endured. Now, with new technologies revealing countless hidden sites, a larger picture began to take shape. The ancient world was not a patchwork of isolated cultures, but a network of civilizations connected by a shared reverence for the sky. Their monuments spoke the same language, one formed from alignment, geometry, and the belief that the heavens guided life. As the sun climbed above the newly uncovered mound, light traced the outline of a staircase buried for centuries. The moment felt familiar, as though countless sunrises had performed the same gesture long before modern eyes returned to witness it. Each step carried the promise of a larger revelation, still hidden beneath layers of soil and time. And with every new discovery, the sense grew stronger, that humanity stood at the threshold of understanding, a chapter of its past, long buried but never entirely forgotten. As night settled over the newly uncovered landscape, silence returned to the ridge, broken only by the faint rustle of wind weaving through vines. The ruins below, once hidden from all but the forest itself, now lay fully exposed, their patterns visible beneath the moon. Along the edges of terraces and stairways, shadows formed the same shapes they had for centuries, repeating motions that once guided ceremonies, migrations, and entire calendars. Watching the ruins come alive at night made it easy to imagine the people who built them, looking upward with a clarity that modern eyes often overlook. Across continents, discoveries like this continued to reshape the understanding of early civilizations. Each site added a new piece to a larger mosaic, a narrative in which knowledge was never confined to one region, one group, or one era. Instead, it appeared in waves, emerging during periods of transition, guiding societies towards stability and growth. Monument after monument repeated the same message. The sky mattered. It shaped identity, belief, architecture, and memory. and for countless cultures it remained the source from which the earliest guidance flowed. Stories of visitors from above, preserved for generations, gained new resonance when viewed through the lens of these discoveries. Civilizations described radiant beings who taught them to mark the passage of time, cultivate land, build structures, align to celestial cycles, and navigate vast distances. Whether interpreted through myth, symbolism, or literal memory, these stories reflected an undeniable truth. The people of the ancient world believed their earliest teachers came from the heavens. The architecture supported this belief. Every alignment, shadow play, and stone-carved cycle echoed a worldview shaped by long-term observation. Cultures built stairways that reenacted descent, plazas that mirrored star patterns, and underground chambers that preserved cycles undisturbed by weather. These structures were not passive symbols. They were functional instruments designed to endure. They connected the earth below to the patterns above, creating physical pathways between the world of humans and the realm from which knowledge had descended. Even as civilizations shifted, collapsed, or migrated, the monuments remained. They preserved the memory of relationships between sky and earth long after stories began to blur. Many communities continued to treat these sites as places of return, locations where celestial teachers might descend again. Rituals developed around this expectation, timed to align with rare events traced across generations. The anticipation of return shaped festivals, architecture, and the symbolic language woven into daily life. Centuries passed, and new societies rose over the foundations of the old. Some honored the structures they inherited. Others reshaped them to suit changing beliefs. But even when the purpose was forgotten, the alignments endured. The sun still illuminated markers on specific days. Moonlight still entered carved openings with precision crafted by ancient hands. Constellations still passed through frames set into stone. The cycles continued, carrying the work of the builders forward long after memory faded. Today, the rediscovered sites serve as reminders of that continuity. They reveal a shared ancient intelligence, one that valued the sky not as a distant spectacle, but as a guide. With each newly uncovered monument, the scope of that intelligence grows clearer. Patterns emerge linking regions once believed to have developed independently. Stories echo across continents. Symbols match despite vast distances. The suggestion is not of imitation, but of a foundational belief carried across generations and landscapes. This shared legacy raises the same question found in countless myths. Why did the teachers leave? Some stories describe their departures as voluntary. Others portray the separations as part of a natural cycle, appearing in one era, withdrawing in another. A few suggest they left because their teachings had taken root, and humanity was prepared to advance without them. Whatever the reason, the expectation of return remained strong. Civilizations built markers not only to honor the past, but to guide the future, to point toward the sky when the signs reappeared. In some regions, carved inscriptions spoke of a time when the world would face great change, and when celestial guidance would be needed once more. In others, rituals passed down through generations preserved instructions for watching the horizon during rare alignments. These traditions reflected a belief that the sky held answers to questions extending far beyond daily survival. The people understood that their place in the universe was part of a larger story, one that might include more than the visible world. As modern explorers step through the ruins, they often describe a feeling of recognition, an intuitive sense that the structures were built to communicate across ages. It is not the precision alone that evokes this response. it is the intention behind it. The desire to leave clear messages for those who would one day rediscover the meaning embedded in stone, shadow, and alignment. Today's technologies allow researchers to see what ancient builders perhaps sought to preserve: a record carved into the earth that reflects cycles written in the sky. The rediscovery of these patterns creates a bridge between past and present, allowing the questions that guided early civilizations to guide new generations as well. What was once interpreted as myth gains new depth through the architecture beneath it. And with each revelation, the ancient message grows louder. Look upward. Observe carefully. Cycles return. Memory endures. The builders of the ancient world may have vanished, but their legacy remains etched into landscapes across the planet. Their monuments continue to function, their stories continue to resonate, and their knowledge continues to emerge from the earth after centuries of silence. Whether their teachers were celestial figures, travelers from distant realms, or symbols of enlightenment carried across generations, their influence is unmistakable. In the quiet light of early dawn, the rediscovered stairways glowed as they once did, guiding attention toward the horizon. The stones held their positions, waiting for the next rising sun, the next alignment, the next generation ready to interpret their meaning. The legacy of the skyborn lived on, not only in the structures that survived, but in the enduring human impulse to seek understanding in the heavens above.